everyone. Welcome back into the Wobcast 2.0, episode 15. Come back to clinch. That's what the Minnesota Vikings did on Sunday. They stunned the Indianapolis Colts 39-36 to clinch the NFC North. They moved to 11-3. Giles is here, Chase is here, and yours truly, Wobby, is here to talk about it. On the show today, we review that win over the Indianapolis Colts. We take a deeper dive on the Vikings defense. We are going to power rank the possible wild card round opponents for the Minnesota Vikings, and then we'll preview the Vikings' upcoming game, the New York Giants. To do all of that along with me, it'll be Giles and Chase. Hey, fellas, how's it going?
I'm doing better now. I feel like someone needs to go call the heart doctor because that was quite an experience. That was some ups and some downs, definitely a tale of two halves, but I am glad we're in the Victory Monday formation.
Yeah, me too. Chase, how you doing, bud?
Really, really good. I'm starting to think that a win is a win is starting to become a Vikings fan's main slogan versus goal. Because we just kind of keep figuring out how to win bad games. So
yeah, well, this one is kind of an over the top one, guys. This is a where were you moment in Vikings history. I will have to say, and I think we can be a little bit critical or we can downplay a little bit the significance of the win because it came against just a ratty, awful team being coached by a studio analyst, being quarterbacked by maybe someone who's lost 4 or 5 steps and has a penchant for choking in those moments, which he did in the Super Bowl. So there are some things we can take away from the Vikings here, but the bottom line is not every team in the league could do that. Could come back from that deficit. The Vikings did do it, and they've been doing it all season, and they found a way to win. Might be something in the air in that building with miracles and dramatic finishes, but what they say, it's not, they don't ask you how, they ask you how many when the season is over. Well, it doesn't matter how you won your games. It matters how many games you won. That was the 11th one, and it was a big one for the Vikings because it clinched the NFC North. Now, I don't think that really was in doubt here in the last month or so. But you still wanted to get it done, and you did get it done. And so now you can move on to worrying about the 2nd seed or the 3rd seed because it's going to be one of those two things. And we're going to talk more about that later on in episode 15 of the Wobcast 2.0. We'll talk about the playoffs, and we'll power rank the possible opponents for the Vikings. Really, it's 5 possible opponents. Could be 6. It could be Dallas, but it's like a less than 1% chance of that happening. So we'll exclude them from the conversation. We'll talk about and power rank the other 5. That's later in the show. For right now, let's review this win over the Indianapolis Colts, guys. It was obviously a tale of two halves, and Giles has a tale of the tape that we're going to get into in a little bit. But, suffice it to say, they trailed 33-0 at halftime. I don't know if people left the building. I don't know if people turned off their TVs. But anyone who did either of those two things missed a classic second half. Because the first half was awful. The Vikings gave up touchdowns on a blocked punt, on an interception return, and they gave up 4 field goals, plus 1 offensive touchdown that they allowed to trail 33-0 at halftime. And I think, if you were watching the game, you were probably depressed and feeling down in the dumps. But if you really analyzed it and thought about it, I think you sat there at halftime going like, it doesn't, like, how are the Vikings down 33-0? Like, I'm not going to predict that they can come back because that's just absurd. But, like, I don't know, maybe they can come back. At least that's what I was thinking. It didn't feel like you were down 33-0 to like the Eagles or the Cowboys or the Packers when they were good. It kind of felt like a fraudulent 33-0, if you know what I mean.
I cannot agree more. I feel like you blinked and all of a sudden you were down by 33 points. You're like, what happened? It just slipped through my fingers. And I think it's important to note that most, like you mentioned before, most of those points came on the special teams unit side of the fence. Yeah. I actually think our defense did pretty well considering what was going on. Because going into that game, a low-key stat that goes under mentioned is that the Colts had a top 10 defense. And they were great in the secondary. Like, they have great defensive linemen up front, and they have a good secondary. Like, that's not a defense that you can say, we should be fine. But they were a really good defense. And more importantly, something that was not talked about all season, the Colts going into that game had the number 1 special teams unit in the league by a long shot. Like, they were in the 90s from a PFF grade standpoint. They're still like number 2 in special teams. They're really good. Like, they're a great special teams unit, which is something to really emphasize. But I think you're right. That's just kind of slipped through our fingers in the first half.
Yeah. And so, I think we can be very critical of the Colts' shortcomings in the second half, and talk about how they were not able to sustain any drives, take any time off the clock, make one play that mattered, get a quarterback sneak to seal the game. Nothing. There was just, if this was a Colts podcast or an NFL podcast, I'd say let's spend more time talking about that. But instead, let's cast our gaze and focus a little bit on just the Vikings and their performance. So, the tale of two halves conversation, Giles, walk us through that a little bit, because you shared some stats with us earlier, and we all saw it. But you look at some of it, and the rushing, the yards per carry was very similar in both halves, right?
Yep.
And you had some mistakes from Cousins that you don't typically see, right?
Yeah.
Like throwing the pick six. And whatever happened at halftime, I don't know exactly what it was, but they certainly were able to turn it around. So when you look at the numbers, Giles, or when you just were looking back at tape, or when you were watching it live, what do you think it was? What changed?
That's a great question.
For those
Can
watching,
you see my screen? I was going to say, I was going to show you a few numbers. Sorry, go ahead.
Yep, I can see it. So for those who are watching us on YouTube, you can, you can see the numbers. For those listening, you can't. But Giles can walk us through some of it. But, rushing attempt was virtually the same. Obviously, the yards per pass attempt drastically different. 6.8 in the second half when things were going well, 1.7 in the first half. So I don't know. I'd be curious to sit down with Kevin O'Connell and say, what do you think happened, Coach, in that first half? And what happened at halftime that led to some of these drastic changes? Do you have any hunches on that?
Honestly, I think it goes down to drops and incompletions, because I think there were a number of times we were able to get open. And I think that's definitely a commendation to the offense, because they were getting extreme pressure on us. Because I was thinking there for a second that we were going to have a repeat of the Cowboys game, where they were getting so much pressure that there was no way we could move the ball. And really, we were struggling from a completion standpoint, where Cousins was able to get into the hands of a lot of people. They just couldn't bring it in and bring it out. So I think that's definitely an issue that needs to be discussed this week as they're preparing for the Giants. But really, I think they were just able to be more successful with the pass game up front. And beyond that, I think, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but the time of possession was significantly favoring the Colts, where, as you can see there, we had 99 total yards in the first half. And then when you include overtime, the second half, you had 419 yards. Yeah. And that's partially due to time of possession, period. Like, we just simply did not have the ball much. And when we did have the ball, we made a few mistakes, and we threw some picks, and we had some mistakes that led to the other team scoring points. Everything just kind of culminated to a massive dumping on the field, so to speak.
Yeah. All right. So was there a moment for you guys during this second half comeback for the Vikings where you were a believer that it was going to become complete and at least become a tie game? And while you're thinking about if you had that moment or not, let me walk you through sort of what happened, because I had the opposite feeling. Like at halftime, I'm kind of like, I kind of expect this to be a game. I don't know if they'll complete the comeback and tie it, but I expect this to be a game. However, the Vikings' very first possession of the second half was not inspiring.
No, did not go well.
No, that was not good at all. In fact, they went backwards 8 yards. But the Colts couldn't do anything either. And the Vikings scored 2 pretty quick touchdowns after that. And to me, when the fourth quarter was starting, and then they scored a touchdown very early on in the fourth quarter, I was like, I think this is going to happen. And the people with whom I was watching the game, I didn't get loud with them about it. But I kind of had a good feeling for the Vikings after they started the fourth quarter with a touchdown. Was there a moment for you guys where you thought that was going to happen, or were you never a believer of it? What was your thinking during the game?
This might have let too much emotion affect my feelings there, but I really think that Justin Jefferson pass on the second drive of the second half, Justin Jefferson caught a pass for 13 yards. And I think when you compare the entire first half, we couldn't get the ball moving at all. And then when you get a medium length pass. I think there was just so much momentum built into that, and I forget exactly the stance of Jefferson after he caught it, but people are like, "All right, we have the ability to move the ball," and then we just kind of pieced it together from there. And honestly, I was in a group text with Chase and a couple other buddies, and I said, "We're going to win this game." I'm like, I really think that our team has so many offensive firepower units that we can win this game if we can string this together. And really, I didn't think we were playing all that different on defense, where I thought, like, if you can minimize the mistakes, which thankfully they did, I really think there's a route to making this happen, and thankfully they proved us right.
Yeah.
How about you, Chase?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, Giles. I was not a believer in this game, but the one moment in the second half for me that really kind of sparked something was and this is a little different route than you guys both took, but it was a Justin Jefferson catch where I want to say Gilmore got called for unnecessary something, helmet to helmet or something. Jefferson got killed. He got hit really hard, went to the sideline, and then they showed him, and he was ready to go. He came right back out on the field and marched in there. He knew he was the best player on the field. I thought that was like, okay, like that's the dog in our team, you know?
Yeah. I think after that play, Chase, and you guys might remember seeing this, I saw Kevin O'Connell, the camera showed Kevin O'Connell go over to Jefferson and talk to him. And I am quite certain that what happened in that conversation was O'Connell came over and said, "You're going back." You know, he knew he was going back in the game at that point because he went into the tent to be evaluated. And I think he said, "Don't go out there like no chippiness, no smack talking, no getting back at him. Just play your game, do your thing. Don't let him get into your head." I'm fairly certain that was the conversation because Jefferson's an emotional player, I think. And the difference between Jefferson and someone like Jair Alexander or Stephon Diggs, who also play with great emotion, is a lot of times it gets the better of them and they become distracted and engaged with the opponent. And to me, I don't see that with Jefferson. To me, Jefferson is internalizing all of it, and he's not getting in other players' faces. He's not showboating. He's not taunting. And I think O'Connell was trying to keep Jefferson on that track by having that little, like, it was just 5 or 6 seconds, but I'm pretty sure that's what the conversation was about.
I could not agree more. And I think whenever you elicit that type of emotion, especially on the playfield, that invites competition back, right? When you're throwing it in them, I mean, you don't make it to the NFL without having a competitive spirit. That invites them to try to go back at you. So I think even from your logical perspective of trying to win the game, I think it's more important to internalize it versus trying to egg someone else on to try to beat you, especially when you have to come down from that big of a margin.
Yep. Before we dig into the defense a little bit more, because I do want to talk about some things that we saw in Ed Donatel and the discussion that was had last week about he needs to be fired, not with us, but with Vikings at large, Vikings public at large. Should he be fired or not, and changing the scheme? We're going to get into that a little bit here, but let's do PFF grades before we do that, Giles. And you have sent them to us and shared them with us, but I have not looked at them closely. So walk us through some of the things maybe that stood out to you. I know one of your observations is that the drastic change in performance and results from half one to half two may lead to some grades that are hard to sort of reconcile, so to speak. I know that's going to be one of your takeaways, but let's walk through some of these grades and take a peek at who played well and who didn't.
Yeah, 100%. And I'll have you guess a few here in a second, but I think it's important for the audience to note, although I love PFF, I love the people at PFF, sometimes stats can be a little bit misleading when you have a game like this, especially when it comes to like the quarterback position. So I may be revealing a little bit of top 5 or bottom 5, but someone like a quarterback or even a tight end, for example, can be greatly affected by a game like this, where even though they might have a great half, a bad half can also lead to a declination in their points. But as you can see here, we have the at least the starting lineup for the offense for the Minnesota Vikings based on 11 personnel with 3 wide receivers, a tight end, and a running back. If you had to guess, who are the top 3 PFF graded players from this Saturday?
I'd go Dalvin, Jefferson, and I'm trying to think of. I want someone up front here. who I didn't see a lot of, because if you don't see the offensive lineman on TV, that probably means they're playing well. So I go O'Neal. So I'm going to go Dalvin, Justin Jefferson, Brian O'Neal in the top 5 PFF grades.
You are so close. Dalvin was just outside of the top 3. I'll give you one more guess on the other third one, because you got the other 2 right. Brian O'Neal was the number 1 graded PFF graded player on offense, and Justin Jefferson was 3rd.
Okay.
Who was 2nd?
So O'Neal was 1, Jefferson was 3rd. Hawkinson?
Nope.
Dang it.
He actually did not have that great of a game, partially because of the first and second half. But.
Yeah. All right. Chase, you got a guess? I'm wrong on Hawkinson, and I'm wrong on I said Cook, Jefferson, and O'Neal. So O'Neal, you said Dalvin was just outside. So I'm wrong on Dalvin, and I'm wrong on Hawkinson.
I think it's got to be KJ, right?
Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah.
There he is.
Yeah.
Boom, boom, with a 78.5 PFF grade.
him.
He ranked 15th out of 84 qualified receivers that had played at least 20% of snaps. Brian O'Neal definitely showed up and showed out. He was the 5th best tackle in the league out of 70 graded tackles, both left and right tackle, with an 80.1 grade. He's a showstopper, I think. Although Christian Darrisaw graded out a little bit less than what he'd normally have done in weeks past, he's still an above-average tackle in this game. He had a cramp throughout the game, which I think kind of dinged him with one of the plays, gave up a pressure or 2 more than he typically does. But I think we have 2 amazing tackles, which is an amazing element. Dalvin Cook obviously graded out with a 75.2 PFF grade. He did great. That screen pass towards the end there was phenomenal. One of the bigger linchpins in us winning and securing the win and securing the NFC North. So he did great. Kirk Cousins, unfortunately, graded out at a 57.4 PFF grade, partially because of his low performance in the first half when you look at completion percentages. And more importantly, the 2 interceptions that he had from Jalen Reagor. Both... at eye test, it looked like Jalen Reagor stopped running his routes, especially on that go ball towards the end that ended up being a pick. That's just a tough scenario, but that really dinged Kirk technically from a PFF grade standpoint. But anything else that stands out among these players?
No, I don't think anything stands out as surprising. Thielen doesn't grade high there at all, and I think we've kind of gotten accustomed to that this season, but I still think he provides some value.
Red zone target.
Yep, definitely. Interior of the offensive line not grading well, but they haven't. That's been them all season, and you're asking a lot of a backup center, and I don't think the Colts front is bad at all. I think it's pretty good actually. So I think they were
especially
challenged.
with DeForest Buckner. Yeah.
Yep,
100%.
I think they were challenged, and they did enough in the second half to make it work. Dalvin, Dalvin's a special player, and my brother sent me a text. He lives in Florida, and obviously was watching the game, and he's like, to see Dalvin turn on the afterburners the way he did on that screen pass just gave me goosebumps, he said. And I'm like, I know, I swear every game it seems like I'm saying to whoever I'm watching the game with, man, Dalvin is fast, and if you think or notice someone is being fast on an NFL field, they're real fast, because everyone out there is fast. That's just what it is in the NFL at this level. So I think 75.2 is a pretty decent grade, but I don't think it's reflective of the impact that Dalvin has on the offense and how much stress he puts on opposing defenses every week.
I could not agree more. And I know I mentioned this at the beginning of the season. I expected Dalvin to have an above average, if not elite season, because of the way our system uses running backs. If you look back to the 2018 Rams and the way they used Todd Gurley, I was expecting Dalvin Cook to have a phenomenal season. The reason I bring that up is I've almost been looking at our usage of Dalvin Cook throughout this season like we've been putting a governor on him from a schematic standpoint. Not that we're not trying to have him have explosive plays, but there's a part of me that thinks that they've been trying to reserve some play calls that they can leverage at the end of the season and into playoffs, where people are like, oh my God, you've never used Dalvin Cook that way. Like, we don't know how to game plan for you anymore if you're into the playoffs. For example, the screen pass that he used to be able to hit the touchdown toward later in the game, we haven't been doing screen passes all season. Now, screen passes are very reliant on precise timing. So if you haven't practiced screen passes, it's not like something you can just whip up and say, oh, let's just run a screen pass, let's just make it work. You need to execute and practice those throughout the week before you can actually implement that in a game. So there's a part of me that thinks that there's been a governor on Dalvin Cook that we're just starting to see loosen up.
Sure. Yeah. And if so, great time for it, because to have fresh legs and new concepts at that position is a big deal at this time of the season. So last thing I'll say before we switch to defense too is the people who are watching this and can see it will see the grades atop the graphic, each individual player's graphic. Underneath it, what Giles has there is where they rank among all qualified players who were graded at that position that week. So Brian O'Neill, 5/70 means he was the 5th highest graded player of 70 right tackles who were graded.
Actually, all tackles, just to confirm.
So left and right
all
tackles,
qualified tackles.
Left and right, which is why Darisaw is also 70.
Correct. Same thing with guards. Yep. So left guard out of 66 qualified guards, Ezra Cleveland was 45th.
And I believe the qualification is on number of snaps in that game, right? Yeah. So so 33 quarterbacks had enough snaps last week to be graded by PFF. Cousins ranked 19th out of all those quarterbacks. And again, if you watch that game in the second half, Cousins was like number 1, number 2, or number 3 out of 33, right? But in the first half, he was probably like 32nd or 33rd. So where does it kind of grade out and balance out? And it ends up being at 19. And this is why we say, these PFF grids are not the be all end all of evaluation. It's a data point based on lots of data points, and it's fun to talk about, and it's fun to have a point of data to discuss. And so that's why we do it. And we'll switch over and talk defense here on those PFF grades, unless you guys had anything else on the offense before we switch.
Last thing I wanted to bring up is the center position with Austin Schlottman. I think he's a solid backup center for us. And I can't believe I'm saying this over and over again, but I really miss Garrett Bradbury. I think he's been doing a much more phenomenal job this season in comparison to when we drafted him. And he's been having some lower back issues. I believe I heard that he actually got in a car accident after the game on Saturday and further tweaked his back injury. And I think that can become a point of concern when you think about shoring up the interior offensive line, because I think Ezra Cleveland is an above average player. He's a great run blocker. He's okay in pass protection when he is schematically put in a position to do so. And I think when we have had Garrett Bradbury in, Ezra Cleveland has done a better job, period. When you look at the games where Garrett Bradbury has either not played well or he's not been involved, Ezra Cleveland has often mimicked that. So I think if you want to get the left side and the interior part of your offensive line shored up, I'm really hoping we can get Garrett Bradbury back by the end of the playoffs, or at least the start of the playoffs, rather.
There's absolutely something to be said for when you get a starter back within the offensive line, the effect that it has not just on that position, but on the neighboring positions. That is totally true. And maybe center more than any other, because they're right in the middle of everything and they're making calls and all of that. So you want good, sound, quality backups. But when you're missing a starter up front there, it's a big deal. Now, what will be interesting with Garrett Bradbury is he back next year or the year after? If so, at what cost? And if so, at what position? Right? Because the Vikings thought they had something in Pat Elflein a few years ago, and then they didn't have what they thought they had, and they tried to move positions with them. And so that'll be interesting to see, because maybe they find a great center that the new staff and new regime really believes in, and they draft him, but they still want to hold on to Bradbury and they slide him to guard. So anyway, that's a discussion for another day. But the point is, multiple episodes of the Wobcast 2.0, Giles has said, man, I miss Garrett Bradbury, which stands to reason that perhaps he should and will be back with the Vikings next year and in seasons to come.
Yeah. And I think if you look at it from the other side of the perspective, though, if they can really take Garrett Bradbury from what he once was to this, imagine what they can do with someone that they actually drafted. Now, I think the criticism to that comment would be Ed Ingram. He's still been struggling. It'll be interesting to see what he can do in the offseason. I know he had some injuries during training camp, but he's continued to struggle to the point where it's become a liability. So I'll be interested to see what they do at the center and right guard position in the offseason. But Neither here nor there. Chase, unless you have something else in the offense, we'll move over onto the defensive side of the football.
Let's do it.
Yeah, just super quick. I got to give a little bit of a shout out to Ezra Cleveland.
Okay.
I know that the 55.8 is nothing to highlight, but we were just talking about Dalvin Cook's game-tying touchdown and how fast he looked on that touchdown. And I just have to give him credit because Ezra Cleveland crossed the finish line not too far after Dalvin Cook did. And I think some of our players who obviously, when you think of Minnesota Vikings, Ezra Cleveland is not the first guy you think of. We won that game because a lot of our not as good players did all the little things to win the game. And I thought that was a really cool thing to see that Ezra Cleveland was running down there with them. I mean, he shouldn't be able to move as fast as Dalvin. And I'm not saying he was, but he was down there with them. So that was really cool to see.
Yeah, because definitely pivotal to getting him in the end zone was having someone to block him at the end there.
Yep.
Yeah, could not agree more. All right, let's head on over to the defensive side of the football. Do we have any thoughts about the top 3 defensive players from the PFF standpoint?
I have a hunch. I'm guessing Daniil and Za'Darius are in there, and I'll put Harrison Phillips in there as well.
You got one of those right.
Okay.
Za'Darius Smith was the number 2 ranked player on the defense.
Okay.
The others were not in the top 3.
Okay. All right. Kendricks was all over the place, and I know he had a pretty good looking box score. So let's go there. And I'll just go with the guy who's the straw that stirs the drink on that side is Harrison Smith. So I'll put it. My final guess is Harrison.
Not Harrison and not Kendricks.
So PFF will not be hiring me onto their staff anytime soon.
It is someone that was talked about at the end of the game that motivated the team to come back from the huge deficit.
Who was that? Do you know who that was, Chase?
I do, but it's only because I saw it before this. So
okay. Any guesses? There's rumors that this person kind of gave a pep talk in
that's got to be Peterson.
The locker room.
That's got
Patrick Peterson, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
He did phenomenal. He graded out at a 76.4 PFF grade. He went into the locker room at the halftime, went up to Kirk Cousins and says, "We're going to stop him moving forward. You just need to go get 5 touchdowns. That's all." Which sounds outlandish when you say it like that, but that's exactly what they did. So give it up to Patrick Peterson for really providing a show-stopping day. He was 11th out of 94 qualified cornerbacks that played at least 20% of the snaps. But more importantly is on the other side of the field in the same position. Duke Shelley was the 4th overall graded cornerback last week. The 4th.
Wow.
And he was an undrafted, if I remember correctly, or at least he was on a practice squad not that long ago. And now he was a shutdown corner when it came to Saturday's game. And I think it's important to note that the entire season we have played primarily zone coverage. There's a few variations, a lot of cover 6. But in this game, most people didn't really analyze this super closely, but we played a significant amount more man defense for the first time all season. And I think part of that is due to Duke Shelley and his capabilities, where we were able to shut them down. When you think about holding the Colts to 4 field goals throughout the first half and then essentially 0 points or 3 points in the second half, a huge part of that was Duke Shelley. He did a phenomenal job at shutting down from the cornerback perspective.
That's just incredible.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely phenomenal.
All the resources that teams devote to that position, which is one of the 3 most important positions in the sport right now.
Yep.
And you get a guy like Duke Shelley, who is just, no one knows who he is. I mean, that's incredible. 4th out of 94 graded corners.
Yep.
Wow.
Absolutely phenomenal. And I'm a huge fan of Cam Dantzler. I think he has a chippiness to him, but I think if Duke Shelley continues to play this way, I'm sorry, Cam Dantzler, I love you, but we have to start Duke Shelley.
Yes.
I mean, knock on wood that he continues to play this way. He has had one not so great game, but I think in the 3 games that he has started, 2 out of those 3 have been great games. This being by far and away his best game. But I think he is in the making to have a great future in purple.
Awesome.
Now, when you look at the front lineup, Harrison Phillips had a pretty good day to 72.3 PFF grade. Did pretty good up front as the nose tackle. Dalvin Tomlinson had a not so great day in contrast. I don't know if he was dealing with an injury. Typically, he's performing in a top 5, top 10 category for a defensive tackle, but graded out at a 58.5 PFF grade.
So, you know, just watching the game and noticing like who are we seeing, it felt to me like Harrison Phillips was great. You know, I think he was a pain in the ass all game for the Colts.
Yep.
So, you know, I'm not surprised to see him have a green grade here. And if any, I mean, 22 out of 120 is very good. But if anything, I would have put him higher. You know, and I think Daniil had a sack and a half. And to me, you know, not every snap of Daniil's is a great rep, but Daniil's great reps change the game.
Yeah. He's a showstopper. He's a freight train when he's given the opportunity.
Yeah. I guess you would liken it to a power hitter. Lots of strikeouts, but lots of RBIs and home runs.
Yep.
And to me, that's what Daniil is. So kind of a low grade here relative to what I thought his impact was on the game.
It's also important to note that Daniil is playing a new position, and I think that is obvious to most people at this point. But when you get down to the usage of his new position, it's important to emphasize the distinction, because in his former position, he had his hand in the dirt and he was rushing the passer pretty much every time. I think he dropped back into coverage maybe 5 times last season, if I remember correctly. He is dropping back into coverage a much higher amount every game. He's dropping back into coverage 2, 3, 4, 5 times a game now, and it's important to note in those 5 touch points or those 5 plays, he is not rushing the passer. So now he's being evaluated in a coverage standpoint, which can lower his overall PFF grade and reduce the number of pressures that he's getting. So it's important to note that he's playing outside linebacker now. He's not an edge. Although he's an edge rusher, he's also backing off into coverage. So it's important to note that, and I think that's hurting his overall PFF grade. I think another point. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. Keep going.
Another point to call out here is that in this game, we played a significant amount of more players along the defensive front than we usually do. I would say Harrison Phillips and Dalvin Tomlinson typically play the majority of the snaps, and we had a lot of distribution of reps. When you look at it, DJ Wanham, he played a lot of reps, and he actually ended the day with a 75.5 PFF grade. I mean, he played far fewer snaps, but he was playing a lot, so from an outside linebacker's perspective. Azezi Atomowo, he had a 70.9 PFF grade. James Lynch, who plays defensive tackle, he had a 69.8% or 69.8 PFF grade. So the point is, our defensive front here listed on the starters didn't necessarily play the majority of the snaps. We had a huge distribution, and the other players that didn't technically start all did pretty well from a PFF grade standpoint. So I think it's important to note that and how that can hurt the overall PFF grade for a person like Dalvin Tomlinson, especially considering the snafus of the first half.
Sure. Yep. You know, and going back to Hunter and the discussion, you know, and what you were saying, Giles, he is playing a new position, still rushing the passer most snaps, but on other snaps is being asked to drop, which he was rarely ever asked to do when the Vikings were in a 40 front playing a 4-3 defense. And it will be interesting to see what Daniil's place is in this defense, assuming he has one in Ed Donatel and Kevin O'Connell's defensive scheme. If he does not, what do they do with him? How do they attain value for him if they want to trade him or whatever it's going to be? And if they do keep him, do they find a way to rush him more times than not? Do they have him bulk up and play D end in a 3-4, or do they train him as an outside linebacker? And this is an example of how you get a new coaching staff and they bring in their own schemes, and some things you can change quickly and some things you can't, and they take a while. And this position here, Daniil Hunter, is an example of one that takes a while, and you have to accept the growing pains that come along with a new coaching staff, which the Vikings have right now. So, you know, the organization and the fans wanted something new on defense, and they got it. And they like some of what they're getting. Look how Patrick Peterson is playing as an example. But some of it you got to put up with too, like dropping Daniil Hunter into coverage. So it'll be interesting. That will be an offseason talking point, Giles and Chase, is what to do with Daniil Hunter between the end of this season and the start of the next.
I could not agree more because I was thinking about that this week. Because really, when you look at Danielle Hunter's skill set, he is best used when he's rushing the passer. When he's rushing the passer, he disrupts games. He is a freight train. So I feel like it's a disservice to both him and the team to have him back off into coverage. But that is your scheme. That is part of your illusion of complexity to try to say, is he going to rush? Is he not going to rush? But his value does not really reach its true potential when backed off into coverage. So I would say one of two things happen this offseason. He gets moved inside to a defensive tackle or a defensive end, technically in a 3-4 scheme. He bulks up.
5 technique.
Yeah, exactly. Or we trade him and we get massive value from it. I don't see any other world where he's with the Vikings. I don't believe he would come back in an outside linebacker capacity. Now, I might be proven wrong, but that's my position at the moment.
I absolutely think you're getting a first-round pick for Hunter if you trade him.
100%. If not two, considering if they can get a few flat splash plays here by the end of the year.
Yeah,
because sometimes general managers make emotional decisions based on some big moves.
Yep, they do. That's right. And I don't know if this was true or not, but I believe that there were trade calls for Burns in Carolina, Brian Burns, and that one of the offers was 2 first-round picks, and Carolina held on to them. And so that kind of goes to show you the value that teams who run an even man front would place on a guy like Danielle Hunter, who can rush from both sides and is obviously demonstrating the ability to do something different by being an outside linebacker in a new scheme, and is still playing well in his first season. So that'll be an interesting storyline to follow once the season concludes. Anything else here on defense before we talk about my man, Ed Donatel?
One last thing off of that, but while I have it in my mind, and we'll definitely talk about this a lot more in the offseason, but I think it's important to note that we're going to have a lot of players that need to get paid in this offseason. So there's a chance that they will very strategically move off of Danielle Hunter because he doesn't fit our scheme as an outside linebacker, and he can't really be as big as we prefer him to be on a defensive tackle. And we have another several positions that require some better talent because Harrison Smith, there's a chance that he is no longer with the team in the offseason because of his high cap hit. So there's a chance that we could leverage those 2 first-round picks to be able to make up for a lot of the other positions because of how much we have to pay other people. I mean, even Zadarius Smith, I believe, is due $12 million next year when he's making $3 million to cap this year. So there's a lot of cap issues that will become an issue once the new season starts that I think you're going to have to get creative, and I think Danielle Hunter might be one of those.
Yep. Agreed. Well stated. All right. Should we talk about Ed Donatel and the scheme?
Let's do it.
All right. Well, last week, some people wanted him fired. This week, I think you got to be feeling a little bit better about him. And obviously, when cooler heads prevail, I think even the most critical of fans probably wouldn't have given Donatel the axe. At least I hope not, at least not at that point in the season. But I think a more material question is, did we see a schematic change? Did we see a dramatic shift in the way defense was done? Because we did hear some talk of that even from Vikings head coach Kevin O'Connell, that maybe we needed to find some more ways to be aggressive and to dial up some pressure. So did we notice that against the Colts?
I think so, from 2 different changes. First being our ability to put in more players more frequently. Because before, the same front 7 played a majority of the game, and they would be the guys that would tackle the run and the pass. And we filtered in a lot more backups into the lineup throughout the course of the game. And I mean, I'm not a football expert by any stretch of the imagination, but the way I look at that is they are simply trying to keep guys fresh and keep guys fast, because our entire defensive strategy, although it prioritizes a few other things, tremendous off-the-ball speed is one of them, and it's hard to be fast all the time. So I think they were trying to prioritize a greater level of speed with simply having fresh guys. You look at that across the defensive lineup, or defensive line, and the outside linebacker group. DJ Wanham played a lot of snaps. I believe Patrick Jones III had a few snaps, if I remember correctly. Yep. And I see them filtering a lot more people in to try to keep that freshness. I don't know. How about you? Do you agree with that? Did you see that as well?
I did see that, and I am not a religious counter of the snaps, and I don't even always go to the game book after the game to check it out, but I did this time because I noticed more numbers in there. And what got me to notice at first was how much more Wanham played. I think he played a lot more than he normally does.
Yep.
So yeah, that is a change I noticed. Now, I think you really got to go back and watch tape or find someone who you trust to see, do they call more pressures and more blitzes than they have on average. And I don't know that for sure if they did or not. But I noticed more players being used, and I just felt like they were so dominant in the defense in the second half was just dominant over the Colts, that it was just so overwhelming that it was hard for me to like really pick out what they were doing schematically to make it work, because everything worked. They were rushing really well, they were covering really well, and they were getting off the field on third downs.
Yep. I think that actually leads into my second point. I do believe that they were dialing up pressure a little bit more, but in my opinion, not a ton more. But that's where I think the huge drop off of our entire defense over the course of the season has been a pretty decent pass rush, but a very poor coverage unit, where even though we were developing pressure, the play developed so quickly that we couldn't actually get home and we couldn't actually develop pressure, which you can be. I mean, we have two of the best pass rushers in the league, but they didn't have time to get home if coverage was giving up right away. And that is one thing that I do believe changed in this past game against the Colts, in the fact that we ran a decent amount of man coverage in contrast to exclusively zone coverage throughout the course of this season. And with Patrick Peterson and Duke Shelley, I think they pulled it off. And when you're able to hold coverage a little bit longer, your pass rush is able to develop more, right?
Yep,
That's the schematics of football. So I think we were able to punish that a lot more because of their wide receiver ones. I mean, Michael Pittman Jr. is essentially their wide receiver number one, and he doesn't really scare you. I think he's a decent number two on most teams, but he's not a wide receiver one. So we were able to punish that a lot more in a man coverage standpoint. I do believe we're going to be able to mimic the same thing against the Giants, the Packers, and the Bears. I don't have anyone on those teams that really scare me, so I think we can continue that on and really show up and show out. I don't know if you can continue that once you play into the playoffs, when you play a Stephon Diggs or someone like that. I don't think you can hold up against man. Now, that's my opinion now. Maybe we can leverage Duke Shelley to do it, but I think time will tell. But I think that was part of the reason we were able to increase the pressure.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I think Donatel took too much criticism last week after the loss. I don't think he should be completely exonerated or vindicated from it. I think he's game to be criticized as much as anyone, but I think he is heading up a significant change in scheme and eventually personnel here, and it's not going to be 100% great the first year, and it hasn't been, but I think he's bringing that group along pretty well, and the bend but don't break defense can be teased a lot, and it was against the Lions, but honestly, I mean, the last 3 weeks they're 33% red zone defense, and you continue that here for the next 3 weeks and you're going to be the 2 seed, and you continue that for 3 weeks after that and you're going to be in the NFC Championship game. So they do not give up a lot of touchdowns in the red zone, and that is something you can hang your hat on. So I think some encouraging performances here by the Vikings defense of late. The Lions was not, but the Jets game was encouraging, and I think this Colts game was encouraging as well.
Yep. Especially when you look into the next season. I mean, this season's not over, so I don't want to get too cart before the horse. But I'm really excited to see what the front office does to be able to shore up some things, because I think we talked about this last week. But when you bring in a new coach and a new scheme, you're not bringing them in just for a single season. You're trying to say, this is the new philosophy of our team. And I think this defensive scheme relies on corners that you can trust and really fast linebackers. And I think those are two things that aren't necessarily true on our team. Now, they could have come in and say, all right, well, we can't run that scheme because we don't have that personnel. But they didn't do that. Like that, that's just, it didn't happen. And I think Jordan Hicks, although he's a great tackler, a tidbit slow. Eric Kendricks, very smart middle linebacker and is an above average top 5 player in other schemes. He's not necessarily the fastest guy on the playing field, right? So that is one thing that has struggled in this scheme. Same thing with Harrison Smith and Cam Bynum. Harrison Smith is slowing down a touch. Still a very smart player, but not as fast. And I think Cam Bynum, unfortunately, has really started to struggle. Where I think, honestly, if you're trying to prepare yourself for the longest stretch of football this season, I think you got to put in Josh Metellus, because every time Josh Metellus has started, he's performed and been the best safety in our lineup. So I think, although I love Cam Bynum and I was really hoping for great things from him this year, I think you got to move in Josh Metellus to be able to shore up that secondary, because That's become a major issue.
Metellus, when I watch the games in person or on TV, when I'm watching special teams, I mean, that guy is a player. And if you can get him schematically, if you can ask things of him in the scheme that are very similar to what you ask of him on teams, I think you can win with him on the field on defense.
Yep. He's fast enough. Yep.
I like him a lot. So I'm with you on that, Giles. I wouldn't be against that. All right, let's take a quick peek here at the Giants. Let's preview that game. But before we do that, let's power rank possible wild card opponents just for fun. All right. So the Vikings have clinched a top 4 seed by virtue of winning the division. We also know that it will not be the actual 4 seed. That will go to the winner of the NFC South, because whoever that team is cannot catch the Vikings in win total. So we know it'll be a top 3 seed. It's very unlikely that it will be the 1 seed. So it'll be the 2 or the 3 seed, and that will be San Francisco and the Vikings vying for those 2 seeds. So we don't know which one it's going to be. The Niners play Washington at home, at Las Vegas, and then Arizona at home. With their quarterback situation, it's really hard to know if they're going to win or lose those games. I have a good feeling that they could win 2 or maybe 3 of them. So it is a distinct possibility that the Vikings will be the 3 seed and not the 2 seed. That's a big deal because that would mean the Vikings, should they win in the first round, would be on the road in the second round rather than hosting a game. So, the hope is that the Vikings can keep winning and hold on to the 2 seed, but it could be the 3 seed. Whether it's the 2 or the 3 seed, it's going to come down to playing one of probably 5 teams. I'm excluding Dallas from this, guys. It could mathematically still be a Vikings-Cowboys matchup in the first round, but like lots and lots of odd things would have to happen for that to be the case. So we'll exclude Dallas. The 5 teams are, in no particular order, Detroit, Green Bay, the Giants, the Washington Commanders, and Seattle. Those are, one of those 5 teams is who's going to be coming to US Bank Stadium in the first round of the playoffs. I'll say it again. Detroit, Green Bay, Washington, the Giants, or Seattle. So those 5 teams, guys, if we were to power rank them, the team that you want to face the most, all the way down to the team you least want coming into US Bank Stadium in the wild card round, how would you rank them?
Honestly, I might say the Detroit Lions because I think
last.
The ones that I want to face the most. Sorry.
You want them number 1. Okay. Got it. What's your explanation?
I would have a close second with the Packers because I think they've become quite a train wreck, but it's still Aaron Rodgers. Although Aaron Rodgers has struggled in the playoffs in the past, he's still Aaron Rodgers, and I think there's a clutch gene there that I'm not in love with from a Viking standpoint. So that is kind of an issue. And I think from a Lions standpoint, I really viewed the Lions game this past week that was a game we could have won. We made too many mistakes, and I think if you play the law of odds, I think we can beat them a second time at the third meeting, if that makes sense. I think defensively, we can put the pedal to the metal. I think if we go into a proper game plan, people are hyper focused. I truly believe that the Lions are probably the best. I don't know. What do you think, Chase?
I don't know. It's between the Lions and the Packers for me, and I'm starting to think that we're giving Aaron Rodgers a little too much credit, and we're giving him a little too much this year, just week to week, and he just keeps not performing like we expect him to. So at what point do we draw the line and just say, you know what, the Packers are a bad team this year, and I would love to play them in the playoffs because I'm just about there.
All right, I just want to come at this from one alternative angle here. Just keep in mind that if it were to be the Packers, what that means has just happened, right? If the Packers make the playoffs, that means they probably just won 4 games in a row, including having defeated the Vikings and having defeated the Lions in the last game of the season to get into the playoffs. And if I'm the Vikings, I do not want a hot and confident Aaron Rodgers and Green Bay Packers coming in the first round of the playoffs after I have had a marvelous season full of comebacks and drama and health, and it's all sort of lining up, and now I got the cheeseheads coming in here to dash my dreams in the first round of that is a narrative I don't think Vikings Nation wants to take on.
That's fair. I can definitely get on board with that. Yeah.
It's a very good point.
Honestly, if you're looking at it from a fan perspective and what would be the most fun to watch, I might have to shift my answer to the Seattle Seahawks, because they are more or less a powerhouse from an offensive standpoint. They've had pretty great production across every offensive category, but defensively, they're real bad.
Yeah.
They're not doing great on defense.
Yeah.
So all that to say, the matchups there would maybe lead me to believe that it'd be a really high scoring game, which I'll always believe that the Vikings have enough offensive firepower to beat anybody if they can actually click. Now, obviously, if you make mistakes, things fall apart. But when you look at the firepower, mano a mano, the Vikings win. But that'd be a really fun game because it probably would be pretty high scoring.
So Seattle would be number one for me, guys. That if I'm the Vikings and I can pick who I play of those 5 teams, I would pick Seattle. And you're right, Giles, that offensively, they can score points. I mean, they can light it up. But they don't. Nothing they do on defense scares me right now. They have like 3 picks in the first 40, I think, and I think all 3 of them are going on defense. And I kind of like some things they have on offense, actually. Defensively, though, no bueno. And that is who I would pick to play. A very close second would be Washington, who I think had the Vikings beat in the regular season, and the Vikings found a way to, snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. But Heineke playoffs, and then just the chip on his shoulder that Cousins would have going against Washington in the first round of playoffs. I would want every part of that if I was the Vikings, is Washington coming in. Now, the thing that would scare you a little is I think Ron Rivera is a great galvanizer, and I think their defensive front is vicious. And
especially with Chase Young
coming back. Yep. So that I don't love. I don't love that, but it's a quarterback league, and Heineke coming into US Bank Stadium in the playoffs, I think Washington would struggle to score points. And to me, it's Seattle and Washington, clear cut 1-2 for me. The Giants, I'm unsure about, but what I wouldn't like about facing the Giants, and we'll see this week, is the mobility of Daniel Jones and how they have a great running back in Saquon Barkley, and then a quarterback in Daniel Jones who can move, and just that mobility, and Zadarius Smith and Danielle Hunter doing their jobs and pressuring the quarterback, only to watch him slip out and gain and extend plays and drives with his leg. That would kind of be frustrating.
Yep. I think it's important to note that the Vikings do have a top 5 defensive unit from a run stopping standpoint per PFF. So although Saquon Barkley is a phenomenal running back, that doesn't scare me. Maybe it should, but it doesn't. And if you can continue to play man defense with Duke Shelley against kind of a non-threatening wide receiver group from the Giants, maybe the Giants are honestly a good one to go after. I know they are pretty stout defensively. I'm interested to see what that matchup looks like come Saturday of this week, but time will tell.
Yes, and Giles, we're going to see it too. I mean, they play the Giants, so we're going to see, and we're going to preview the game here in a minute. But I think I don't like going against Brian Daboll. I think he is on fire right now, dating back to his time with the Bills and now as head coach of the Giants, where they are overperforming. And just the zone read option concept that they can work with Barkley and Jones, I think it is a headache. So I got them 3rd, and then Detroit, Green Bay in some order would be 4th and 5th. The narrative, like we talked about earlier, I just don't think you want that. If Green Bay makes the playoffs, it's because they won 4 straight and they beat you. And God, would Aaron Rodgers love to come into US Bank Stadium and the Vikings. I mean, he lives for that. He lives for that. And you're right, Giles, that Rodgers has something about him in the playoffs where he doesn't perform great. I'm wondering, though, if some of it is like playing outside in Green Bay and that he doesn't love that. And he would be inside at US Bank Stadium for this game. So anyway, just a fun activity to power rank the possible opponents for the Vikings in that wild card round. More likely than not, they will play in the wild card round, and it will be at home, and it'll be against one of those 5 teams. So excited to see who it is. I don't know that we're going to get much clarity on that this week either, guys. a lot of very particular things have to happen for there to be clarity in the NFC playoff field after this week. I think there's still going to be a lot of ambiguity. The Packers can lose and still not be eliminated, as an example, which is crazy, but true. So there's a lot to still figure out in the NFC playoff field. Let's talk about the Giants, guys, before we get out of here. 8-5-1, currently the 6th seed. They defeated the Washington Commanders last week on the road. 7th worst defense in yards allowed, 3rd worst pass defense, and 14th scoring defense, giving up 22.2 points per game. A quarterback who can run, an elite running back in Saquon Barkley, and then 3 headaches up front on defense in Kayvon Thibodeau, Dexter Lawrence, and Lawrence Williams. That's what I see when I take a look at the Giants. I expect a slow grinder of a game early on, and then I think this thing opens up and it gets high scoring. What do you guys think?
Honestly, when you take away the run game and the premier tackling of the Giants, I think they're an average team. I love their coach. I was actually a huge advocate that he come over to Minnesota. Love Brian Dable. I think he did an awesome job in Buffalo. I think that's something to be worried about. But outside of that, I do believe they're an average team. When you take away the tremendous tackling, they're elite in tackling from a defensive standpoint. They have a really great run game, one of the best in the league. But outside of that, I think they're average. So I think that leads me to believe we're going to win. I am interested to see the storyline of how our team bounces back after another emotional win. I do think this win was different than the Buffalo Bills game. I didn't see the type of emotion after this game that I didn't see after the Bills game. So I'm hoping that we're able to keep things relatively even, that we don't get too overly excited on ourselves so we can actually come in and show up. So that is one storyline to follow.
That's a great point, Giles. That's absolutely a factor in the National Football League. It was totally what led to the huge loss the Vikings had, the blowout loss to the Eagles after the Minneapolis Miracle. Very good point, and that was an emotional win for the Vikings. So we will see how Kevin O'Connell can get his team to respond. Chase, what do you see in the Vikings-Giants game?
Yeah, like you said just a couple minutes ago, Wabi, it is a quarterback's league. And I don't think this quarterback matchup is close at all. Can Daniel Jones rush? Yes, he can. Is he a top rushing quarterback in the league? Yes, but I still think honestly, you could say he's a bottom 5 quarterback in the league, and that's not a crazy thing to say. And I just think with the chip that we have on our shoulder right now, just from how we came out in the game on last Saturday, I don't know if this is going to be close. I think this might be a get right game for us.
All right. Well, we will see. We will not speak, guys, at least not on camera or on microphone before Christmas. So Merry Christmas to you both.
Merry Christmas. Hopefully we get a nice little gift with Victory Monday again.
I hope so too.
Victory Sunday.
Victory Sunday and Monday. Yeah, right. And Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Holidays to everyone else out there listening as well. Enjoy that Vikings-Giants Christmas Eve game. It's on Saturday, just as last week's game was. And see if the Vikings can get a victory to move to 12-3. Their final 2 games, of course, against the Green Bay Packers and Chicago Bears, both of them on the road as the Vikings stay in the hunt for the number 2 seed. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Wobcast 2.0. We encourage you to listen to future episodes. Go back and watch old episodes. You can find the Wobcast 2.0 wherever you find all of your favorite podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify. We are also on YouTube. You can find me and debate me on Twitter at Wobby, where we will break down the top 10 left tackles in the NFL. Later this week, you will see a shiny new graphic from Giles and from Chase breaking down the top 10 left tackles. Would love to have a discussion and maybe a debate with you all about that. You can also email the show, therealwobcast@gmail.com. For Giles and Chase, I am Wobby signing off of the Wobcast 2.0 for now. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and Skol Vikings.